Hello, you're watching Coronavirus Catch Up. I'm Jordan Kenny. Welcome to the programme. We're live tonight on the BBC News NI website and Facebook page and on the BBC iPlayer for the next 25 minutes or so. Thanks for tuning in, however you're joining us. So the Executive has been meeting today for its latest review of Northern Ireland's COVID-19 restrictions. A number of things have been agreed and there's 3 dates to look forward to. The first date is Friday the 21st of May, on which up to 1,000 spectators will be able to attend the Irish Cup final at Mourneview Park in Lurgan. The next date, and probably the biggest one, is 3 days later, Monday the 24th of May. We're finally going to be able to eat indoors at restaurants as indoor hospitality reopens. You'll be able to go out for dinner or a pint in groups of up to 6 people from 6 separate households. The remainder of the tourism sector, including hotels and bed and breakfasts, will reopen, and for those of you who have been asking, wedding receptions and post-funeral events have also been given the go-ahead. Fans will be able to get back to watching sport in person as up to 500 spectators will be allowed to attend events outside. Schools are able to resume extracurricular activities, which will also allow for sports fixtures to be held between schools. It's good news as well for history buffs and bookworms. Museums and libraries will reopen. And lastly, for this date, the advice to stay local will be removed. Now, this all comes with a massive asterisk beside it because ministers are meeting again next Thursday to sign off on whether these changes will go ahead. But we'll hear more about that in a minute from our political reporter, Jane McCormick. The third and final date to mention is the 21st of June. That's a date that you might have heard mentioned in relation to restrictions easing in England. But in Northern Ireland, come the 21st of June, theatres will reopen, so big news for those working in the arts, and conferences will be allowed to take place. However, again, this is an indicative date and will be reviewed by ministers nearer the time. So that's where we're at, but just before we came on air, the Executive has released more details about these restrictions. Our political reporter, Jane McCormack, is with me now. Jane, what are the nitty-gritty, what are the details that you can fill us in on about these restrictions easing?
Yeah, this statement came, I guess, about 15 minutes ago or so, Jordan, confirming most of what you've gone through already. But there are some key other elements that we didn't know were coming today. So I think the big one that everyone's going to be interested in is when can people meet up with their friends and families inside their homes again? Well, what the Executive is telling us again is that hopefully from Monday the 24th of May then, you'll have 6 people from 2 households will be allowed to meet up with each other inside a home. Now, we're told that children won't be counted towards that total. Children under 12 won't make part of the total. And we're also told that overnight stays will then be permitted in somebody else's home. So that is a really significant piece of news because for so long, we haven't been allowed inside other people's homes with the exception of somebody who has a bubble. So that's one element of what is changing, hopefully from the 24th of May. We also are being told that from that date, the advice on only travelling to Northern Ireland from other parts of the UK, if it's essential, that's going to be removed. You talked about the stay local order being removed. So as part of this then, there's going to be guidance to be allowed to visit friends and family in other parts of the UK and in Ireland and other parts of the common travel area as well, places like the Isle of Man, the Channel Islands. So those are some of the other significant things coming out of this Executive meeting today. We're told that they met for more than 4 hours. It was a pretty chunky session. We didn't think at first that it actually was going to be all that significant because we were being told that everything needed to be signed off next week as well. But I think given what they've come out and indicated to us tonight, clearly things are moving in the right direction, and now fingers crossed for next Thursday that everything will go ahead on the 24th of May.
Well, Jane, you mentioned it, this review next Thursday. I just want to ask you about that. How likely is it that all this will come to be next week, that they'll sign everything off?
I think it is likely. You can never prejudge the outcome of an Executive meeting, and we know that with coronavirus things can change incredibly quickly. But to give you a sense of what ministers are thinking, we know that they got a paper on the R number, the reproductive number of the virus today, and we know that they were told that R is stable. Hospital admissions are still at a very low level, and really at this stage things are all still looking very good. So with that in mind, and I suppose just considering the risks maybe around the Indian variant, and we know that is a concern, but it's not a huge concern at the moment. I think taking all of those statistics around coronavirus into account, along with what's happening with the vaccination programme, I think everybody will be crossing their fingers that when ministers meet next Thursday, it's just a case of rubber stamping this rather than having to get back into some of the nitty-gritty to think about whether or not it should be going ahead, because they are raising people's expectations by putting all of this out there.
Well, you mentioned the Indian variant and the vaccine rollout, Jane. We're going to get onto that later with questions in about that. But if you're in England, England or Scotland from Monday coming, you'll be allowed to meet indoors. And here that was to be allowed from the 24th of May. Is it likely that we could be meeting friends and family indoors at pubs and restaurants, Jane, but not in their homes come the 24th of May?
Well, we thought that might have been the case prior to 15, 20 minutes ago when that statement came out. So see how things changed so quickly, Jordan. No, I would have thought now that come the 24th of May, that is when we will hopefully see all of hospitality reopening indoors and outdoors. We know that there are going to be changes. So currently, if you're outdoors at a pub or a restaurant, it's 6 from 2 households, and that's going to change. It will be 6 from any number of households. So it's 6 from 6 households per table. So that's changing, and I think it would be slightly odd if they then wouldn't allow us to meet with our friends and families inside our homes. So as I've mentioned, the plan is to allow 6 people from 2 households to meet inside a home from the 24th of May. And I think the difference there is that they can monitor it more in restaurants. There's social distancing in place and mitigations. You've got to wear your face mask when you're walking around the restaurant when you're not seated. It's slightly different in homes where they feel that maybe people might let their guard down a little bit more. So I think when it comes to lifting the restrictions on meeting people inside their homes, that will probably be eased slower, I guess, than other elements. So I'd imagine they'll stage that, where you might see then 10 people from 4 households allowed to meet up inside a home at some point. So we'll just keep an eye on that one.
Right, well, let's get into the questions that we've had sent in from our viewers. We're going to talk about a number of things tonight. We've got weddings, then vaccines and variants, like I've already said, coming up. So for those of you watching on Facebook, if you have any questions about those topics, feel free to get involved, stick them in the comments section, and we'll try our best to get to them before we're off air. But before we come to that, Jane, let's have a look at travel. Lots of news this week about what's been going on with travel in England and traffic light countries, but plenty of questions remain on the situation in Northern Ireland. The most popular question by far this week, it's been asked by so many people. Rachel is one of them. She's asking, when will the guidance to isolate after travelling from England, Wales or Scotland be relaxed?
So the first thing to say about that is it has always only been guidance, and I think the executive has expected people to use their common sense around it. If they're travelling to other parts of the UK, obviously where it's essential for work and health related purposes at the moment, people have been able to go over and then come back without self-isolating. What we're being told tonight as a result of what the executive has agreed today is that from this date of the 24th of May, the guidance on self-isolating will still be there, but there's going to be this additional exemption so that if you want to go over to England or Scotland or Wales and visit a friend or a family member that you haven't seen in a very long time, and let's face it, many people have waited quite a while for this, then you're not going to be required to self-isolate for 10 days when you come back. So it looks like that is going to change fairly quickly if ministers can finally sign that off next week.
Okay, we've lots of questions in, Jane, as well about travel between Northern Ireland and the Republic. Steve is asking, when will I be free to cross the border for any purpose, or am I already allowed? What's the situation with crossing the border?
Yeah, it's a bit of a funny one at the moment because obviously the advice from the Stormont executive at the minute has been to stay local and to only travel across the border if it is essential. And we saw that letter from the Health Minister, Robin Swan, to his counterpart in Dublin, Stephen Donnelly, last week, saying that he wanted to try and keep an eye on cross-border travel and to use enforcement if required to really stop it unless it's really necessary. However, over the border, it's a slightly different situation because we know that earlier this week, the Irish government relaxed the rules on inter-county travel. So in theory now you can travel from Dublin to Donegal, and some of the political parties here were saying it's a bit bizarre that you could do that, but you couldn't, for example, travel across the border into the northwest, into Londonderry. So it looks like as a result of what ministers have agreed today, it's not just going to apply to England, Scotland, Wales and Great Britain, because the Republic of Ireland is also part of the common travel area. I would have thought that they're going to ease up on that slightly, but I still think it's a case of asking people to use their common sense and still thinking before they make any journey. Yeah.
Well, that's travel within the UK and Ireland. When it comes to international travel, again, lots of questions. Daryl's asking us about it tonight as well on Facebook. But Chris, he's also been in touch. He's wanting to know just simply, when will international travel resume from Northern Ireland?
I don't know. I don't think the executive knows either, unfortunately. I mean, I was of the understanding that some of the proposals that they were discussing today were about trying to get international travel up and running fairly soon. It looks like they maybe still have a little bit more to work through because there's been no mention of it in the statement that has come out this evening to journalists. However, we do know that they do have this red list in place, the traffic list or traffic light system, I guess, that the rest of the UK also has. England is moving to that from Monday, and I think once the rest of the UK starts to move, then the pressure will ramp up here, and I would imagine it's something that the executive will probably come back to next Thursday, so we might have more news for you at next week's Coronavirus Catch-Up.
Well, you mentioned there about England's travel rules changing on Monday. One of the countries we have been asked about specifically by quite a few people is Portugal. That's because it's on England's green list, and also the Champions League final has been moved to Portugal between Chelsea and Manchester City. So that's maybe what's prompted a few people to get in touch with us about Portugal. Gian, I mean, given we've been talking about restrictions not easing in Northern Ireland until the end of May, so the likelihood of fans from Northern Ireland being able to travel to Portugal without having to isolate or even being allowed to travel to Portugal before the end of May is quite slim, isn't it, with all of this?
Yeah, it's very slim, and we can't advise people what to do. We haven't heard anything from the executive about letting people get onto planes and head off to sporting events again. I suppose the one indication that change is coming is that they are going to remove that stay local advice from the 24th of May, but what do they replace it with then, or do we just go back to normal? It's really not clear, and I think there are questions to be putting to ministers about this. Unfortunately, they haven't been doing the press conferences for some time, so we haven't been able to clarify what the situation is with travel, but hopefully we'll maybe find out some more about that next week.
Right, moving on from travel, another big topic, Gian, weddings. And we've actually had quite a few questions about travel and weddings, people wanting to know if they can travel to weddings. So let's tackle those ones, Gian. Are weddings classed as an essential reason for travel, firstly?
They are not specifically mentioned on NI Direct. That's the government's website that gives you all the information you need to know about coronavirus. Now, weddings are not specifically mentioned as an exemption under essential travel. However, I think ministers and their officials would probably say that people should be using their common sense, and if you feel it's essential to be travelling over for something, that's up to you to make that call. However, we know at the moment there haven't been really many wedding receptions taking place because they can't take place in indoor hospitality venues and that kind of thing, so there probably haven't been that many weddings up until this point. But given that we learned today that weddings hopefully will be able to start, or wedding receptions will hopefully be able to start taking place again from the 24th of May, then you'd have thought then that more people will be able to travel here and across the water to go to their friends and families' weddings.
Right, Laura is one of those people who's been in touch about weddings, and she's asking for the rules to be explained in the plainest way possible. So I thought we could do a bit of a quick fire kind of mastermind sort of vibe about things to do with weddings. First up, guests. How many guests are you allowed at your wedding?
There's no specific limit on that. What we are told is that it's up to the venue where you're getting married. They have to do a risk assessment and they have to decide how many people they can safely hold. So there's not a specific limit the way there is in England or in the Republic of Ireland. It's really up to the venue that you're getting married in.
Right, next one, face coverings. Do guests at weddings have to wear face masks? So
I think the answer to that is it depends on where you are getting married. Now, the rules, if you're getting married in a church, for example, the guidance is that you should be wearing them on entering the church and on exiting the church. There's details that the bride and groom don't have to wear a face covering. Apart from that, it doesn't really go much further than that, but I guess what we do know is that with indoor hospitality reopening on the 24th of May, I'm sure there will be people who will be getting married in the likes of a hotel or a restaurant, for example. The guidance for indoor hospitality is that when people are not sitting at their table, if they're moving around the venue, they should be wearing a face covering. So you would imagine if you're planning on having a wedding reception in one of those venues, then you'll need to have a face covering if you're moving around at the reception. But I think it might be a different story for the ceremony.
and we've heard about the return of wedding receptions today. So on that, you know, it's a staple of wedding receptions a lot of the time is a live band. Are you allowed to have performers at your wedding, Jane, or your wedding reception?
From what we're told, no. I think this was the case last year as well. If you remember, they brought out some pretty strict guidance about weddings, and no live music was allowed. You could have sort of background level music so long it was as it was at a low level, because I think the argument was that when there's live music or loud music, people tend to raise their voices. If they're indoors, there's more the chance that the virus can spread around people. So it seems that they're still retaining that guidance at this moment in time, because what we're being told is that the couple can have one dance to pre-recorded music and nobody else can dance. So it's good news if you're not a fan of dancing at weddings, but if you wanted to have that proper traditional wedding reception, I think you might still be waiting for a wee while.
No dancing. Seating arrangements, Jane, do you have to be seated in households?
No. Now, from what I'm told, there's been a lot of information coming out today. Let me just double check my notes here. From what I've seen, so there's going to be no restriction on your top table. So that's where the bride and groom would sit. So I guess they can have a table as big as they want, and they can be from any number of households. And other tables, we're told that it's a maximum of 10 people per table, but there's no limit on the number of households. So hopefully that's clear.
Right. Lastly, in your quick fire round, are you allowed to have other forms of entertainment that you sometimes see at weddings? So the example we have been given in this question is photo booths. Things like that, Jade, you know, they do come at weddings, but are they something that will be allowed under the restrictions?
I don't know the actual answer to that. I mean, hopefully I'll be able to ask the executive office and get some clarity on it. I don't think they're specifically mentioned as something that is banned. However, it just might be something that hasn't crossed their paths yet, really, in terms of what will be allowed. We do know there was previously a sort of a Q&A guide on the NI Direct website going into a bit of detail about what exactly was allowed. I would imagine that they'll have to revise that. So I think ahead of wedding receptions resuming, we'll just have to keep an eye and just see if there's any more detail around that. So I don't have the full answer on that.
And, you know, this question is from Paul, and we were mentioning dancing at weddings. I suppose it applies to weddings, but he's asking in a more general sense, so I'm just going to put it to you that way as well. Dancing, not just at weddings, but when can we expect the return of dancing, you know, in pubs, bars, nightclubs, dare I say? That's probably a lot further off, but any insight on that you can give us, Jane?
I don't know if we wanted this news. From what we're told, the ban on dancing seems likely to continue for some time yet. Hospitality sector representatives were told this afternoon that even when they do get the green light, hopefully to reopen on the 24th of May, there still won't be dancing permitted, and there still won't be live music permitted for some time, and there's been no indicative date or sense given from ministers about when they expect that to resume at this point. I think you know, we have made a lot of progress. A lot is going to change from the 24th of May as well, but I think given the concern there still is around the Indian variant, and with not everybody having had their second jab yet, I think there's just a little bit of progress to make on that. So no, for now, unfortunately, there's no dancing.
Well, mentioning vaccines, Jane, we'll move on to the next topic. The vaccine rollout here has, you know, as we all know, been staggering. The latest figures from today show almost 1 million people have had their first jab and over 500,000 people have had their second jab. Colin has asked Jane, when can under 30s expect to be offered the vaccine? And Adam, he's taken it even further. He wants to know when those aged 20 and other might be offered it. So probably a difficult one for you to answer, given that you don't, you know, work for the Department of Health, Jane. But any insight on when these younger age groups could potentially expect to be offered their first jab?
We don't have a great deal of clarity about that at the moment. Now, obviously, things were moving at pace here in Northern Ireland because they opened up a bit of limited availability for 30 plus towards the end of April there, and they seem to be moving quite quickly along with that. But there's been no mention at this stage of when they plan to move it to the next group of people, and certainly I haven't heard any mention about the under-20s. There was obviously a bit of concern last week when the news came that they were going to change the vaccine they were offering to the under-40s from AstraZeneca to Pfizer, just because of that concern about blood clots. Obviously the department has come out and said it's still not an issue, and they still want people to come forward and get their vaccine. Given the numbers that are there at the moment, clearly they're still making progress, but again, we'll just have to keep asking the department and see whether or not they feel that they can get to the next group quicker. If you remember, Robin Swan, the health minister, said that he expected that all adults in Northern Ireland would have their first jab by the end of July. I don't know if we're still on target to meet that, but it's something to put to Robin Swan.
So something to keep an eye out for when those dates are announced. A quick one on testing, Jane. In England, people can get lateral flow tests to take twice a week at home. Can people in Northern Ireland do the same?
Yes, you can. I've obviously heard of people who I know who have been doing this. The Department of Health, it's pretty clear on their website. Their advice is if you can't work from home, you should also be participating in taking these tests either once or twice a week before you go into work. Now, they do say that if you work for sort of a larger employer, your employer should be offering these automatically to you. But the service is also open, that people can either order online and collect them from a site, or they can also have them delivered to their home, as far as I'm aware.
I just want to ask you this one, Jane, from Facebook. It's from Samuel, who's watching, and he's asking about indoor sports classes. Obviously, gyms reopened, a couple of weeks ago, but indoor sports classes are still banned. Have we any, idea of when they could be making a return? I think possibly towards the end of this month. Now, I'm just trying to check my notes from the statement that came out from the department no, this is it when the statement
ago.
comes out. So
this is
so
it.
close to before we go on air. This is the real journalism here.
This is in live time.
The behind the scenes.
Because from what I understood earlier, the indoor sports from the 24th of May was only going to apply to sports clubs as opposed to classes for anybody who just wants to go to a spin class, for example. So I'm just taking a look through the statement here. Yeah, it seems from the 24th of May, you'll be able to go back to a class. So it says, resume indoor group exercise and training in numbers limited to suit the venue. This includes soft play areas, leisure centres, gyms, swimming pools. So I think that's a pretty clear answer. If they can sign it off next Thursday, then the following Monday, gyms and all of those places that offer classes will be able to start them again. But I suppose it'll have mitigations and it'll be in line with social distancing.
Well, there you go, Samuel. There's your answer for that. The last topic, Jane, for tonight is variants. You've mentioned the Indian variant already tonight, but that's something we've been aware of for a number of weeks now. I chatted about it with our health correspondent, Mary-Louise Connolly, on the programme a few weeks ago, but it's back in the headlines today after Boris Johnson said he was anxious about it and that he was ruling nothing out to tackle it. Even today, it was announced anyone over the age of 18 in parts of Lancashire can have a vaccine after an increase in cases of the Indian variant there. Just for a bit of clarity on this, Jane, how many cases of the Indian variant has there been in Northern Ireland?
So as of today, we know the Department of Health has confirmed to us that there have been 12 cases of the Indian variant in Northern Ireland so far. Now, last week, the authorities had originally told us that 7 people had tested positive. What we don't know is whether or not these additional cases are linked to that first group of people who tested positive. And we don't know. The Public Health Agency hasn't been able to confirm where these cases were found, if they were linked to travel. We just don't know an awful lot about this. However, what officials are also saying is that at this stage they're not overly concerned because it is such a small number of cases. But clearly you're right. Boris Johnson wants to keep an eye on it. We know that at today's executive meeting, for example, it was discussed among ministers, and clearly they will have to ensure that as we lift more restrictions and things start opening up, that this variant doesn't also increase along with that.
What threat, Jane, does this variant pose to the easing of restrictions here in Northern Ireland? Could it set us back any, potentially?
That's a really hard question to answer, and I think ultimately that's why you get these little asterisks beside the indicative dates. The reason that ministers have said they're indicative and need to be signed off nearer the time is because they know how quickly the situation with the virus can change, and we've seen it before. We've all experienced it last Christmas when the Kent variant came into place, and we saw how quickly that moved, and all of a sudden the majority of cases were being linked to that in Northern Ireland. So we've been here before, and ministers don't want a repeat of that, which is why they're moving slowly to ease restrictions. But I still don't think that what we have today and what has been put out there, if you like, I still don't think, that anything will change dramatically, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, to stop this from happening. But I think ministers would also say that it requires people to also play their part and continue to follow the other rules that are in place, rather than just having a free-for-all and going back to the way things were before coronavirus came into our lives, because clearly we're not at that point yet, and everybody hasn't been vaccinated, and there's still a lot that we don't know about the variants and how it works with the virus. So we just have to be careful and bear that in mind as we start to get some of the freedoms that we've missed so much back.
And just before I let you go, Jane, I'm just going to throw you this question that we've had from Chris on Facebook. He's asking, will social distancing be scrapped on the 21st of June? Now, there's so many dates flying around about what's happening in England, what's happening in Northern Ireland. It can be hard to keep track, but that's not the case for us in Northern Ireland. Sure, it's not.
No, and I haven't heard anything from Stormont sources about social distancing potentially being scrapped on the 21st of June, the way that it has been mentioned in England by the Prime Minister and some of his other officials. We know, for example, Michelle O'Neill and Arlene Foster yesterday had talked about, they were going to talk about hugging and whether or not people will be allowed to hug each other again, because that's another thing that the Prime Minister has said that people in England will be able to do from next week. The message that we're still getting here is that we still have to be cautious, and that some of those other things that we've gotten used to over the past year, wearing the face coverings when we're out in public and washing our hands constantly, there's been no talk of any of that going away anytime soon. So I don't know how they move away from the social distancing. However, what I will say is, for businesses, for those businesses that have been shut down for a very long time and are now trying to work within the guidelines of social distancing, clearly it would be much easier for them if they were able to revert back to not having to use 1 metre plus or 2 metres between tables. So there might be calls for that to happen, but I'm not sure we're anywhere near that stage yet.
Well, something to work towards in the future. Jane, we'll leave it at that. Thanks so much for joining us tonight on the programme. Appreciate you going through those questions with us. It's so helpful to get that clarity. But before we go, just to update you on the latest figures from the Department of Health. 1 death was reported in the last 24 hours. That means the death toll now stands at 2,149. Another 99 people have tested positive for the virus, and 46 are being treated for it in hospital, with 3 people in intensive care units. There have been 658 positive cases in the past 7 days. That's an increase of 50 from the 7 days previous to that. The reproduction, or R number, is sitting at between 0.8 and 1.1. Well, that's it from us for this week. Thanks again to our political reporter, Jane McCormick, for joining us tonight and tackling all of those questions. It certainly helped clear things up a bit. Lots of you were in touch with us this week with your questions. Thanks for doing that. We didn't have time to get to them all, but hopefully we've still helped to make sense of what's been happening and of what's to come. Don't forget that you can keep up to date with all the latest developments on the BBC News NI website, which you'll find at bbc.co.uk/newsni. And you can follow us on social media as well. If you're watching on Facebook, you'll have already found our Facebook page, but we're on Instagram, Twitter and YouTube as well. Just type in BBC News NI and you should find us when you're on there. We'll be back with another coronavirus catch-up again soon, when the executive meet again to discuss relaxing restrictions. I'll see you then. Stay safe.